Further, just because a child can remember words and pictures does not mean that they can remember names and faces of people. One of the most startling realizations that hit me was that being autistic could be in many ways worse than being born blind or deaf. Autistic children, barring exceptions, can see and hear, often exquisitely well. But while blind and deaf children can still receive and respond to social signals through a special sense, autistic children don't have this sense. It is hard to imagine what it is like not to have a social sense, not to be tuned in to other people, their actions, reactions, and the signals they give out to you and each other. As it is, autistic children are not tuned into these things. However, they do have mental capacities that help them to learn about these signals, but they learn in a different way. Sadly, the knowledge they acquire is not the same as the ordinary tuned-in knowledge that we all take for granted. A colorblind person can acquire knowledge of colors and name them correctly, but their experience of colors will remain different. So it is with autism and the experience of social communication. Why does learning in autism proceed along a different route? Because autism starts so early in life, many of the social routes to learning about the world are blocked. Normally developing children can easily follow the path that has been carved out by evolution and culture. But autistic children have to find their own special routes on the byways. This makes them very different from each other as well as different from children who do not have autism. The autism spectrum. When I first saw autistic children, I was only dimly aware that autism comes in degrees, from mild to severe. Actually, all the cases I saw were severe. When I see autistic children now, I am still surprised at how many cases are high-functioning and how many cases have only mild and moderate degrees of autism. To see a child with classic autism has become the exception. But I am reassured that such cases are still there and that they have the same features as they did 40 years ago. However, autism is no longer a narrow category but has widened enormously to embrace a whole range of autistic conditions. It has now become generally accepted to talk about an autism spectrum. What is meant by this spectrum? Actually, it hides a vast array of autisms. All the autisms originate from before birth, and all affect the developing brain. However, their effect on the developing mind can be very different. Consequently, there is a vastly different range of behaviors. Sometimes a family can be justly proud of their child, who is interestingly different, and possibly gifted in some special way. Sometimes a family will be destroyed because their child will be so difficult to manage that they simply cannot cope. Of course, there are many shades in between, and most cases come with a mixture of rewarding and fascinating as well as aggravating and challenging features. Every individual is unique in a multitude of ways, but they also resemble each other in some fundamental preferences and characteristics. What binds them all together, the mild and severe forms of the spectrum? At the core, there is always a characteristic inability to engage in ordinary reciprocal social interaction. There is also a characteristic rigidity of behavior with a multitude of consequences. That is why no one has yet given up the idea that there is a common pattern behind the kaleidoscope of individual behaviors. I will therefore frequently use the familiar terms autism and autistic as a reminder that there is central idea behind the spectrum. 3 cases. Now we shall look at 3 cases closely based on real cases from different parts of the autism spectrum. David has classic autism. Gary has an autism spectrum disorder, ASD, with a diffuse and atypical picture, but such complex cases are actually quite common. Edward has classic Asperger syndrome. David. David was 3 when he was diagnosed as autistic. At that time, he hardly looked at people, was not talking, and seemed lost in his own world. He loved to bounce on a trampoline for hours and was extremely adept at doing jigsaw puzzles. At 10 years of age, David had developed well physically, but emotionally remained very immature. He had a beautiful face with delicate features. Family life has always had to fit around David, not the other way round. He was and still is extremely stubborn in his likes and dislikes. At one stage, he only ate yogurt and refused all other kinds of food. More often than not, his mother has